Throughout human history, art has always reflected the social, political, and religious issues of its own individual time, whether that be the Enlightenment period, which diverted humanity away from religion and towards science for answers on why and how the world functions, the modern age, characterized by World War I and humanity's realization that life may not have any definitive answers for why events occur, or, most recently, the postmodern era, defined by the rejection, parody, and reluctance to follow the patterns constructed by the modernist. No matter the time, art has always reflected the period. One art form in which one can view this transition from modernism to postmodernism is that of film. Film offers a unique example of the evolution between these two time periods, because unlike other forms of art, it was born in the modern era. A certain film that perfectly displays the characteristics of postmodernism, and that could be taught as an example of such, is the 2016 musical La La Land, directed by Damien Chazelle. La La Land exhibits three aspects associated with postmodernism: taking a modern narrative and/or form of storytelling and re-examining it, telling the same common narrative by exploring it through an untraditional perspective that surveys new avenues, and finally, dismantling expectations normally associated with modern films. The first of these traits, which is probably one of the most apparent in the context of La La Land, is taking a modern narrative and/or form of storytelling and re-examining it. The opening of the film displays this by beginning with a grand musical number reminiscent of classical musicals such as Singing in the Rain, in both its application of a large-scale musical number and the use of a Technicolor palette, which is portrayed in the pastel clothing and vehicles present in the opening scene. Another way in which La La Land shows homage to Singing in the Rain is through the title card displayed right after the first musical number. These title cards in both movies can be seen as almost a carbon copy of each other, from the font to the yellow text color and even down to the small legal text displayed below each. The correlation between these movies is almost impossible to miss. Although the similarities between the films are self-evident, what defines La La Land as postmodern in the sense of re-examination is in the structure of the film's narrative. For example, in the traditional musical Singing in the Rain, the film follows a single individual, Don Lockwood, along a common narrative in which he overcomes an obstacle while at the same time winning the heart of Kathy Selden, the film's love interest. La La Land, however, begins by following two separate characters equally, Mia Dolan and Sebastian Wilder. This difference is important because instead of Mia just being another Kathy, the film gives her equal importance by presenting her narrative in contrast to Sebastian's, a perspective which is absent in Singing in the Rain. Another way in which La La Land follows postmodernism is by the way in which the film ends. The film ends with both Sebastian and Mia achieving their goals but without each other. And then in the final scene of the movie, the viewer is shown what might have been if they would have stayed together. This ending first follows the postmodern formula by ending more true to life, with Mia and Sebastian not ending up together, but at the same time does not lose touch with its roots in modern narratives by still allowing each character to accomplish their dreams, emphasizing that dreams are still worth chasing. The film also displays the second of these traits, telling the same common narrative but exploring it through an untraditional perspective. It does this not only by completely fleshing out Mia's role, but also by not following the traditional narrative structure common in modernism. One example of this is how the conflict in the film's plot is never fully resolved, or, as Gary Victor Hill states in his review of the film, the plot of La La Land is simple, but the telling is not. Damien Chazelle manages the extraordinarily difficult task of mixing exuberant fantasy and grim reality seamlessly. The final way in which La La Land adheres to the ideas of postmodernism is by dismantling expectations normally associated with modern films by the way in which the movie ends. In the final scenes, which take place 5 years later, Mia, who is now a successful actress, and her husband enter a jazz bar that turns out to be owned by Sebastian. Sebastian sits down and is about to perform when he makes eye contact with Mia in the crowd. As Sebastian begins playing, the film enters what can presumably be described as both Mia's and Sebastian's imagination on what could have been if they would have stayed together, or, as Hill describes it, a choice between two types of love, for a person or for a chance at success. This scene displays how the movie would have ended if it were to have remained in La La Land, like many of the classical modern films do, such as Singing in the Rain. Instead, the film takes the more postmodern approach by, as it does throughout the movie, returning to reality. In conclusion, La La Land remains a teachable example of postmodernism. The film does this by taking a modern theme, that of following your dreams, and a modern narrative, that of a musical, and placing them in reality in order to convey that although life cannot compare to the fantasy that one creates in their own mind, or the fantasy created by the screen, the dreams of that fantasy should not be abandoned and are still attainable in reality, but may come at a cost. Because, although art may reflect reality, reality rarely reflects art.